being wiped out by a corresponding disadvantage which threatens the survival of the race. Back somewhere in the old days, we wonder sometimes how civilization started. How did we begin this strange, curious, and complicated journey down through time? Who started it off? And where in the world did the great foundations of our knowledge come from? Who were the first scholars? Who painted the first picture? Who wrote the first piece of music? Who was the first to find means of healing the sick, or of creating a code of laws for the benefit of humanity? We're not quite sure, but we know that these things did not come from some privileged overclass. They came through the recognition of the necessities of survival. When Hammurabi created the great code of Babylon, which was to become the basis of every moral and ethical code that ever followed, he was not able to simply copy it from something earlier. It came out of the ordinary practices of the day. He lived in a world that as we live in it, much more restricted, but still there were the token symbols of everything that was going to come. So he found out that people shoddied their goods, that they cheated each other, that when they built a house they did not put in the materials they had promised. And when they said they would do something, they did not keep their word. When no one was looking, they stole something. When someone else was not looking, somebody stole the man's wife. All the way along, there were injustices. So to meet the injustice, Hammurabi created a code of ethics. He said very simply, if you stole, you have to put it back and be punished. If the house doesn't stand up, the man who built it will be penalized, and if he does not make a good correction, we'll toss him in prison. Little by little, these common errors were smoked out, not because some one individual was greatly concerned in solving the problems, but because most people couldn't live with the problems until something was done about them. In the Spartan system, Lycurgus became a very prominent figure. He found that the Spartans were rich and powerful and given to luxury, that they were now trotting about as though they owned the earth, that their morals were getting worse as their prosperity grew greater. So he decided to put the whole thing back into its old pattern, the way it was. And he created a system so strict in Sparta that he cut crime down to virtually nothing. And it was very simple. When difficulties arose, they were looked over carefully, and whoever was blamed had the book thrown at him. Probably a rock at that time. And he was punished properly. He couldn't hire a lawyer to get out of it. He couldn't talk himself out of it. He had to face the consequence of his own actions. And also, Lycurgus made self-discipline and the curtailment of luxuries the basis of national strength. Now, we don't particularly want to follow his example, but it doesn't seem that luxury today is improving as much. In fact, we are now suffering from all the ailments that Lycurgus decided he was going to cure. And for 500 years he did cure them. And after he was gone, the process was continued, and for a long time Sparta was more or less a well-disciplined, orderly, low-crime country. But of course, that was long ago. We are supposed to forget these things and not to realize how our forebears solved problems. The great intellectuals tell us, oh, don't worry about the past. We've outgrown all those homely laws. They'll look to the future. And now people are beginning to look toward the future. They don't like what they see because the future doesn't look very attractive. If, however, we realize that back in those days, when the tribal chieftain made the rules, when some oracle spoke the decisions of state, and where all the legislators bowed before the altars of their gods, and depended upon divine support for the perpetuation of their priestly and princely activities. Things were quite a bit different. They were never perfect, but there were things that were happening all the way along that could have helped. In the midst of all of this, we also had the Mosaic Code. Now, Moses was not a graduate with a Phi Beta Kappa key. Moses was a wandering shepherd. Jesus never went to the university, but his rules, laws, and principles were greater, more noble, and more enduring than all of the accumulated intellectualism of the last 2,000 years. And out of it all has come a tremendous moral influence on mankind. Between Moses and Jesus, the foundations of the morality of the West were established. Both of these were simple persons, comparatively unknown in their own time, not leaders of any particular branch, but persons who had discovered the power of the individual to be right, and what that power could do in the long run of human destiny. So we have these codes, but as they interfere with our present programs of progress, we have a tendency to deny them. It is easy for the intellectual to refer to the mythologies of religion. It is very possible for the physicist to assume that the idea of God is an escape mechanism of the unintelligent. But at the same time, this escape mechanism was an escape, and the situation we're setting up doesn't seem to have an escape. We do not find the answers. We do not find something better to take the place of that which has been gradually run down by sophistry. We are not solving these problems. There are trends, however, showing up, and I think perhaps our international situation is going to contribute somewhat to them, in which the facts are becoming undeniable, and where we are no longer going to listen to the type of thing that we have been hearing for so long. We're not going to allow education to simply prepare us to be animated robots, that we are not going to fall into the old patterns and stay there forever. Even 50 years ago, we had mental freedoms that we do not have today, and our debts were much lower than they are now. The efforts to pass on a sophisticated theory of life has dismally failed. It was discovered, and this fact was clearly proven in the recent effort of the People's Republic of China to make the great leap into futurity. They made the leap and fell flat on their faces. It was a complete, dismal failure. They had decided to cut off forever all relations to the past. They were not going to listen to the sages of old anymore. They were going to become completely emancipated. They were going to live only for the future, under the dictate of a small group of politicians. The thing was so tragic that it will probably never be repeated again, because no one will have the nerve to go through it. And so, in the end of the great leap into future, Confucius returned and became one of the most powerful forces in the development of modern Chinese communist policy. The same happened in the Tibetan misery. The Chinese themselves are now apologizing for it. All of these great moves, these tremendous upsurges of power, this determination to conquer somebody or destroy them, this willingness to sacrifice men, women, and children for the advancement of some kind of political theory. This type of life is not productive of anything except distress. Now, we're not in the moment likely to have a grand emancipation from all this, but we can and do sense the need for an approach that is more basically sound. If, as individuals, enough of us can live this better approach, it will certainly affect the survival of the whole race. Because if a small group can get the firm establishment of reality.